where we are standing is a great place. There are 4 major geologic features that make up the Black Hills, and basically this is a good place. We can see all 4 of them from here. This is why I wanted to bring you down here. The Black Hills, if you want to visualize, sometimes at Lutheran Church potluck, some people, ladies, will bring a Jello salad with different colors of Jello stacked on top of each other. Well, very simply, that's what was happening here a long time ago. This area was under a vast inland sea that stretched all the way from Canada down to Texas, and over eons of time, sediment had washed in, had settled in and piled up one on top of each other, just like this Jello salad, one on top of each other. Well, then something happened about 65 million years ago. If you were to take your fist under this Jello salad and start pushing up, you can visualize what's going to happen. Those colors are going to go up like this, and they're going to go. Well, rock doesn't stretch as well as Jello. And there's a fist that about 65 million years ago started pushing up and started lifting all of these rocks that had laid horizontally for eons of time and started fracturing and pushing. Anybody want to guess what the name of that fist was? You were all there yesterday. Black Elk Peak. The Native Americans consider Black Elk Peak to be the center of the universe. And it is the very center of the whole Black Hills uplift. So what was causing this? Now, you guys have all had science, plate tectonics. This idea of these plates of the earth that fit together like giant jigsaw puzzles are moving and sliding, and some are going under. Well, about 65, 70 million years ago, the Pacific plate was pushing into the North American plate that we live on, and it caused a fracture, a rupturing all up and down the Rocky Mountain front, and started lifting things. And so from here we can see this ridge that's over here in the distance, and that is called the Hogback Ridge. It is the outer layer of the Black Hills. It was the top layer when the uplift started. It's a sandstone called the Lakota and the Dakota sandstone. There's a lot of petrified cypress trees, rocks on that, indicating a fairly tropical climate at one time. It's about 100 million years old, that rock. That rock completely goes all the way around the Black Hills at different elevations, at different widths. The second major geologic feature is this valley that we're looking at, and it's referred to as, for obvious reasons, the Red Valley. It also completely circles the Black Hills. You can't get into or out of the hills without going through the Red Valley, either over the Hogback or through a gap in the Hogback. Now, I'm assuming that you all came in through Rapid City. Well, right out of Rapid, you go up a pretty good hill. That is the Hogback Ridge that you're going up. Then you drop down a pretty good hill, and you're down where Reptile Gardens is, the snake pit there, you are in the Red Valley. It goes completely around the hill. Some places it's very narrow. Some places it's a very broad valley. Up around Spearfish, over to Sundance, it's several miles wide. We're about 200, 230 million years when we get into that formation. Third major geologic feature is the one we're standing on, and this is called the limestone. On the east side of the Black Hills, where we are right now, this is fairly flat, featureless plain. There's some breaks in that. If you go west of Custer about 6-7 miles, you start to see these tan cliffs, rock faces. That is part of the limestone, the big part of the limestone. And it extends all the way up to Spearfish on the west side of the hills. All of the caves in the Black Hills are going to be found in this limestone formation. Wind Cave that we're in the park here, Jewel Cave, all of them are going to be found in this particular formation. It's very porous. It absorbs lots of water. The snow and the rain that fall up west of Custer in the limestone, that rock is called the Madison. And that water eventually trickles down and comes up at Wall Drug when you get free ice water. That wells have been drilled 1,000 or more feet to catch that water that comes out of there. We're back now over 300 million years old when we get to this limestone plateau area. We keep getting older as we come back into the hills. Fourth major geologic feature, if we turn and look this way, you can see those towers. That's Mount Coolidge. If we could just hop over that peak about 1.75 miles, we'd be on the deck at Outlaw. And the fourth major geologic feature is what's called the crystalline core. That is these large granitic outcroppings that came up from deep, many miles deep in the basement of the earth, came up under unbelievable pressure. Black Owl Peak, the Needles, Crazy Horse, Mount Rushmore. These are all part of that uplift that came up. We're back over 2 billion years old when we get into that formation of rock. Some of the oldest exposed rock in North America. The spring of the year, everywhere you go in the hills, you'll see these geology field trips. They come in from all over the United States because in just a few miles distance, they can study some of the youngest rock and some of the oldest rock. The other option is the Grand Canyon, which isn't quite as accessible as it is here in the Black Hills. Well, something that happened in this vicinity a little more recently than millions or billions of years ago, the first documented white person to come into the Black Hills was a trapper by the name of Jedediah Smith. And in 1823, Jedediah was leading a group of 12 trappers. They were headed to the Powder River country of Wyoming, what is now Wyoming, Montana, to make their fortune trapping beaver. Anyway, if we look down here, if you follow that hogback ridge down here, you'll notice that there's a gap there's a kind of a break. There is a very broad east-west valley that cuts through the gap, and that is called Buffalo Gap. And there's a reason for it. The buffalo used that gap for hundreds, thousands of years, where they would go out on the prairie in the spring, and then in the summer it would get hot, the bugs, the insects would bother them. It was so much cooler in Custer, and let's go back. And they'd come back up through this valley. There's a spring there that puts up, I think, 40,000 gallons of water a minute. That there's always been good water in the gap. And so the buffalo would come, they'd come back up in here, and they would spend the summers. Then in the fall, they'd start thinking, oh man, there was so much grass out there. Let's go out there. They'd go back out there, and they'd fatten up. And then the winters would come, and there'd be blizzards and cold. Oh, it was so much warmer in Custer. Let's go back. And they'd come back, and so there was a constant ebb and flow of buffalo through the gap down here as they would come through and go back out for grazing. Well, Jedediah was leading this group, and they were following the trails. They were following the buffalo trails. Jedediah Smith was an interesting man for that period of time for several reasons. One was he knew how to read and write. Most men did not know how to read or write in the early 1800s, but Jedediah did. And also, he had been trained to be a Methodist pastor. After completing his seminary training, he just did not feel a calling to go to some stuffy congregation somewhere, but he felt a calling to go to the mountains. And so he signed on, and he's leading this group of trappers. Jedediah's men commented different about how peculiar he was, because he always would pray before he ate, and he always carried this book that he read out of. But anyway, Jedediah and his men were following the buffalo trails, and they came into the hills right down here. They were walking up a very narrow wooded ravine, which could be any one of these that we're looking at, and a grizzly bear attacked. Well, Jed was walking third in line that morning, and the bear seemed to sense authority, and it skipped the first two guys and went for Jed. Started doing what grizzly bears naturally do with humans. They danced together for a little while. Finally, Jed convinced his men that it would be okay if they discharged a rifle or two. They finally killed the bear, but not before. Their captain had been quite badly mauled. He had had an ear ripped off, his scalp ripped loose. But he remained conscious and told the men to get out their sewing kit and to start stitching. And so they stitched up all of the puncture wounds, and then they got to the scalp, and it was like, what do we? And he says, well, do the best you can. And so they got the scalp back in place. They put a few tucks around the outside to hold it in place, but then they had this ear. What are we going to do with this ear? And he says, well, do the best you can. And so they stuck it on, they wrapped him up, and they camped here. And Jedediah wrote in his diary that after 5 days, the pure mountain air had healed his wounds. And when they took the wraps off, they discovered in all this haste to get him wrapped up and bandaged up, they'd put the ear on crooked. But it was healing up quite nicely. So Jed just said, don't worry. And he let his hair grow long and he combed it over that ear so no one could see the crooked ear.
And that was the start of the comb over.
So that is the first documented. We're sure there were probably some French trappers here in the late 1700s, but nothing was written down. But Jedediah, because he could read and write, and he had a secretary traveling with him, James Clyburn, that wrote and kept a diary, we know that they are the first, credited with being the first white people. Jedediah also is credited with the first act of Christianity in Dakota Territory. You know what that was? They killed some Native Americans in a battle along the Missouri River, and he said a prayer over the dead bodies. So that's credited with being our first act of Christianity in the Dakota Territory. So I told Steve, I don't know if the girls were listening, but
I was listening, Mark, don't worry.
in this area, 5 years ago, I could guarantee you we would see elk. But if any of you guys are hunters, you know what chronic wasting is. The park shot 380 some elk to stop the spread of chronic wasting here over a couple years. We have this summer a couple times, we have seen a few bulls down here, but nothing like we used to. So anyway, the people in my bus heard some of this. One of the rarest mammals alive in North America is a black-footed ferret. And up until a few years ago, they thought they were extinct. Well, out in Wyoming, near Meeteetse, Wyoming, on a ranch, the Pitchfork Ranch, one day this rancher's dog brings this animal up and lays it on the back porch, and they couldn't figure out what is this. Well, federal game fish and parks came, and they said, it's a black-footed ferret. Where did this come from? Well, this rancher had a big prairie dog town on his property. So they decided we gotta do some investigating, and they trapped I don't know how many black-footed ferrets, and through captive breeding they have brought these animals back from what they were almost calling extinct to where now they have released them in national parks and some other areas where there are large prairie dog towns that won't be poisoned. And so there are, the last I heard, there was like 15 or 18 black-footed ferrets here in Wind Cave, primarily nocturnal, and prairie dogs is 99% of their diet. So another thing, for you people that didn't see it, the burrowing owl, did you see the burrowing owl? When we stopped there and I pointed out, this burrowing owl was sitting on a clod of dirt. As we're gonna have to backtrack. I would love to take you down in this way, but they've closed that road off. They are rebuilding it. But when we go back, and right when we make that sharp turn, and there were those tourists from, where was it, some place, Wisconsin or something. I don't know what they're doing out here, but right around that corner, this burrowing owl, which is again one of the rarest birds here in North America, but now there are getting to be a number of them here in the park because they live in abandoned prairie dog towns or holes. So anyway, if we see it, we'll slow down and point. But they look just like a prairie dog out there until they fly away. But anyway, any questions on what you've heard? Or we're gonna backtrack and head up towards Custer State Park and then go and see if we can find some buffalo. The other day we were down here and there was a whole bunch of buffalo right in here in this area, but they have 35,000 acres, so they come and go wherever they want. So
Can I get a picture of you guys? Can you guys get by Mark right there? I'd love to get a picture of you guys in this space with Mark. I wanted to get it.
I'll hide it behind my back. No, it's fine.